Not only that, pray with me tonight. Our Father, we are thankful to be in your house on this very special day on our church calendar, Good Friday. Even more thankful this year because we could not be together last year. And we have celebrated these special days of your season. We ask that you would meet with us tonight as we look once again at the cross. Perhaps we will see something that we've never seen before. But we pray, dear Lord, that you will impress upon our hearts just how much you love us, how much you gave. And may we celebrate on Sunday your resurrection. We ask these things in Christ.
We'll stand with us as we sing.
before the dinner this evening, I would mention that Brother James's surgery went well on Monday. Pray with me. Oh, Father, as we sang this song, there is once again what seems to be ironic contrast to the wonderful thought. How can we instrument of death, of pain, of torture, and the wonderful thing? And how can we speak of Good Friday when it is the day that we remember the crucifixion of our Lord and Savior? And how can we come and die that we might truly live? What a strange, strange thing. And yet you confound wisdom and wise, and you lift up the humble and me. And truly, dear Lord, we believe much of what we are talking about this evening can only be understood by those who have experienced it. And even then, we are a bit puzzled by it. But help us, dear Father, to grasp hold of all the riches of your grace that you have brought through this puzzling. We do thank you this evening. James has come through his surgery well, and we pray for his recovery. And we pray, dear Lord, for others who need a touch from you. Would you lay your hand upon them this evening, and through your stripes, meet with us tonight, Father. Speak through our words. Anoint us as we preach your scripture. May our hearts and minds be drawn to Jesus' name.
Quiet my soul. Redemption still, where your blood was spilled. Oh, my ransom, everything I want to be, I can't be as lost. Lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me
7 scene, story of the crucifixion. We begin reading tonight in verse 23. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall. And after tasting it, he was unable to drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. And sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And above his head they put up the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of Jews." At that time, 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads, and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him and saying, "He saved others. You cannot save yourself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he delights in him. For he said, I am the Son of God." The robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words. Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon all the land until the 9th hour. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of those who were standing there when they heard it began saying, "This man is calling for Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. But the rest of them said, "Let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered into the holy city and appeared to many. Now the centurion and those who were with him, keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the son of Zebedee. On Sunday morning, I looked with you at Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we saw in that prayer that Jesus repeatedly asked that the Father would take away this cup from him. And we saw that this cup that he spoke of was the cup of God's wrath. Not wrath for Jesus' own sin, but wrath for the sins of the world which Jesus was about to take upon himself. And we saw that by the end of that prayer, even though Jesus had asked the Father to take away this cup, that he eventually saw that he must drink the cup in order to redeem lost humanity. It was the only way. And so we saw that Jesus eventually committed himself fully to drinking this cup that the Father had. In fact, when he is arrested in the garden and Peter tries to fight for his release and draws his sword and swings and cuts off the ear of Malchus, Jesus rebukes him and says to him, "The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" So yes, Jesus fully committed himself to drinking And as Isaiah says, he drank it to the very dregs. This evening we are moving on in our story to Jesus' actual crucifixion, and I couldn't help but wonder at how this story begins in light of how the other story ended. Jesus had committed himself to drinking the cup that the Father had for him. And yet we see as the crucifixion begins, we read that they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, and they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink. And I thought to myself, what contrasting pictures these are. In the garden, he had asked that the cup be taken away from him, that he would not have to drink it. But yet he had fully committed himself by the end of his prayer to drink the cup. And yet the crucifixion begins with the statement that he was unwilling to drink. And I thought to myself, what contrasting pictures are these? How can these pictures be together? And yet, I think these contrasting pictures, the picture of his fully committing himself to drinking the Father's cup and this unwillingness to drink this wine mixed with gall that the soldiers offered him, really point to the same thing. Jesus is fully seeking to do all that the Father wants him to do. And this cup which they are now offering him is actually a painkiller. Some have even suggested that this wine mixed with gall or myrrh, as Mark says, was actually a poison meant to hasten the death of those being crucified. And so when Jesus tastes this, he refuses to drink. As we noted in our study of Mark last year, it may be that the women of Jerusalem had actually prepared this drink for those being crucified, prepared a painkiller to lessen their agony. And we suggested, in fact, that they may have been inspired by the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 31:6 says, "Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter." Scholars speculate that these women, observing the intense pain of those being crucified, and knowing this verse, decided it would be a godly task to provide a painkiller through this wine mixed with myrrh. But Jesus, we see, having tasted it, is unwilling to drink. Why? Well, as I said, I believe he was fully committed to doing everything that the Father wanted him to do, and so that he wanted nothing to dull his sentence. He must bear the full assault of everything that man and Satan must throw at him, and would do nothing to get it experience. And truly, his physical ordeal was a terror. the beating, the crown of thorns, the nails in his hands and feet, the agony of striving to draw his next breath. But Matthew, contrary to many modern dramatizations like Mel Gibson's Passion of Christ, really says very little about Jesus' physical suffering on the cross. In fact, when it comes to the physical nature of what Jesus was going through that day, Matthew really only makes one statement about it in our entire passage. That short little statement there at the beginning of verse 35. And when they had crucified him. That's it. Nothing else. Not even the statement that we read in the book of John where Jesus says, I thirst. We do see later that they give him something to drink, but it is not as a result of any cry of his. In the book of Matthew, at least. All Matthew says is when they had crucified. So what is Matthew's focus? What does Matthew want us to see that was involved in this crucifixion? Well, the first thing that I see after the statement he had been crucified is that they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. The gospel writer John tells us a little bit more about this. John says, then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his outer garments and made 4 parts. A part to every soldier and also the tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, to decide whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture, they divided my outer garments among them, and for my clothing they cast it. So Jesus, most of his clothing wasn't worth very much. They just tore it up at the seams and divided it among themselves. But this tunic, because it was seamless, thus of greater value, they gambled for it. Sounds rather callous, doesn't it? They stripped this man of his clothing and he's hanging there dying, and they're gambling over his clothing. I thought to myself of Charles Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, and the vision of Scrooge's death. After Scrooge dies, some of his servants began to pilfer his belongings and take them to sell them to try to make some money off of his death. Scrooge meant nothing to them. In fact, they despised him. He had been rather frugal in his payment of them. And so they steal his belongings and take them to the market. One picture is especially very callous. It says the charwoman's sale is perhaps the grisliest. Next to the shirt Scrooge was to be buried in, she produces his bedding. I'll return the woman laughing and leaning forward on crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. And why not? Scrooge was unloved. And so they treated him in death only as a means of making a profit. They cared nothing for him or his body. In the same way, these soldiers felt nothing for Jesus. He was a despised criminal. And so they gambled for his clothing. Their attitude is far different than the women who will come later to anoint Jesus' body. Their attitude is far different than that of Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, who begged the body of Jesus from Pilate, carefully buried it. And Joseph threw him. Here at the cross, this man who had once stated the foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, is now being stripped of the last of his earthly possessions. Their clothes fall off his back. But it's not just a picture of these soldiers' callousness, their hard-heartedness. It's a picture also of their desire to further humiliate Jesus. Normally, the Romans, when they crucified someone, they would strip them completely naked. Now, there is some evidence among the Jews, because of the religious beliefs, were offered some bit of clothing to cover themselves, but we don't know if Jesus was allowed that or not. We do know that Jesus was crucified on one of the busiest roads going in and out of Jerusalem. The Romans wanted everyone to see, everyone to be warned by the execution of those who were being crucified. And so Jesus is stripped for the public view of all those who would pass by. And then, I think not only do they strip him of his possessions, try to embarrass him, but Pilate also wants to make light of any power that Jesus might be thought to have. We see this in the charge that is placed above his head. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. That charge is made against Jesus, even though Jesus had once been asked to be king, even tried to be forced to be king after the feeding of the 5,000. John 6:15, so Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. Jesus had told Pilate that his kingdom was not of this world. He wasn't trying to cast out the Romans. Pilate knew that the charge was false, but in an attempt to anger the Jews, and perhaps in mockery of Jesus, he places the charge above his head. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. This is what happens, Pilate was saying, to those who try to usurp Rome's authority. This, your king, is now a helpless corpse hanging suspended on the cross. Now we know that Jesus wasn't weak. In fact, Peter is told in this book by Jesus that he could have called 12 legions of angels. And yet we see throughout the text that we read this evening that Jesus refuses to use his power. He refuses to come down from the cross. Yes, he could, but instead he goes like a helpless lamb to the slaughter. So we see that Jesus' earthly possessions are taken from him. He allows himself to be reduced to a helpless person hanging upon the cross. And then we see that his relationships, indeed his most important relationships, are taken away from him as well. We've already seen how the disciples all abandoned him. One betrays him. One denies that he even knows who he is. But they all leave him. They all forsake him to suffer alone. But in the passage tonight, his most important relationship of all is one that is now taken from him. Verses 39 to 43, those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "You are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him." He trusts in God. Let God rest in him now if he delights in him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." And perhaps this is the most difficult attack of all, for really it finds its basis in Scripture. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 22 and 23, it says, "If a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his corpse shall not hang all night on the tree, but you shall surely bury him on the same day. For he who is hanged is accursed of God, so that you do not defile your land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance." Our passage says tonight that Jesus had claimed to be the Son of God. And these looking on mock him and saying, "How can you be the Son of God? You're hanging on a tree, and the Old Testament law says that anyone who is hung on a tree is accursed of God. You can't be God's son. You can't be the Messiah. Someone on a tree dying is cursed by God." And if that were not enough, we have the very words of Jesus. In verse 46, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The passage suggests Jesus cannot save himself, nor will the Father save him either. He has to die in this manner in order to redeem lost humanity. If we would look only at this day, only at the crucifixion, we would surely have to say that God had forsaken him, that he had died accursed by God. Only the fact that the Father raises him from the dead will eventually demonstrate that the Father truly does love his Son. And then there is the darkness and the earthquake. Further demonstrations, perhaps, that the Father is displeased with what is happening. France points out that darkness during the day is a recognized mark of God's displeasure and judgment. James Edwards further notes that darkness at midday is not a divine eulogy, but something ominous and evil, like the plague of darkness over Egypt at the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, or even the darkness of chaos before creation. So, on this day, we see that it appears that nearly everything is taken away from Jesus. The last of his earthly possessions. He has been stripped of his priesthood. pretends to earthly power. He is now stripped of his most important relationships, those with his disciples and his Father. All he has left is his own life, and as we see in verse 50, that too is about to be taken from him. Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and yielded up his spirit. The cross is a picture of a man bereft of everything. And that is pretty much how even those closest to Jesus, his disciples, hiding from the Romans and the women here at the cross, viewed things until Easter morning. And yet, in spite of these pictures, that everything looked hopeless, I believe there are some suggestions even on the day of Jesus' crucifixion that perhaps all was not lost. Yes, as France Edwards indicate, the earthquake and the darkness appear to be signs of God's judgment, but it may be that they are signs of other things as well. Verse 51 says, "Behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks were split." And we might say, well, this is certainly something that God is doing, this tearing of the veil, because it's said that it was torn from top to bottom. And isn't this a picture of judgment? Destruction of the temple. And didn't Jesus himself talk about God's judgment upon the temple? And I would have to say, yes, he did. And yet, when we think of Jesus speaking of judgment upon the temple, we think of Jesus also talking about it as being judgment against the Jews and the religious system of their day. And if Jesus predicted that it would happen, then isn't it not a picture of judgment against the Jews and not of Jesus? And when those saw it that day, what must they have thought? Perhaps they thought of judgment, but later someone thought something else. The writer of the book of Hebrews looked at it and said that as Jesus' flesh was being torn on the cross, so too the veil of the temple was torn in two, thus opening up the way into the Holy of Holies. By Jesus' death on the cross, that place that only the high priest could enter once a year, that earthly Holy of Holies, is now replaced by the heavenly holy place, and now all Christians can enter in because of Jesus' death on the cross. And then there is another result of the earthquake that day. In verses 52 and 53, it says, "The tombs were opened, and many bodies of saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many." And certainly, the opening of the tomb had to be viewed as not just something that resulted from an earthquake, but it had to be viewed as a miracle. Because while an earthquake can split open a tomb, it can't put flesh back on a corpse and revive it to life and cause it to walk into the city of Jerusalem. Now, probably no one looking on that day and seeing these things happen thought that this was a precursor of Jesus' own resurrection or his promise to raise believers to eternal life. But it was still a sign that something miraculous was occurring. In fact, we see that the centurion, the one who was in charge of the crucifixion detail, looks upon these things. And we see in verse 54 that the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Truly, this was the Son of God. And I thought to myself, these events that happened at the crucifixion of Jesus are quite confusing. We began by talking about his commitment to drink the cup and then his unwillingness to drink. We saw those looking on, saying that truly God is not on his side, for he is dying upon a tree. He is cursed by God. And yet now this centurion is saying, truly this was the Son of God. Can two views be any further apart from that? One seeing these events and saying this man is cursed by God, and another seeing these events and saying truly this was the Son of God. And then there were the followers of Jesus, the women who followed him and his disciples. And they looked at these events, and no matter what others thought these things pointed to, they looked and they saw that Jesus was dead. That he was in a cold grave. And their hopes were dashed. And you see, we're going to see on Sunday that they were filled with fear. So there's a lot of sadness. There's fear. There's confusion. Some of these happenings make it look like one thing, and some of these happenings make it look like another. What is it all about? And I thought to myself about all these contrasting pictures and the confusion. And I thought about this past year. It's certainly been a difficult year. A year of confusion, a year of fear, of bewilderment about what God is doing. And I thought about these events of Good Friday and people looking on, wondering what God was doing. They were confused. What was it all about? But I thought to myself, the important thing, in the midst of all this confusion and lack of understanding and fear, is the fact that we see that God was in control of all of it. And perhaps the thing that I would leave with you this evening is that in the midst of our confusion about what this is all about, and perhaps our fear of what's going on, the uncertainty of these days in which we live, we can know that just like on this Friday so long ago, God was in control. God is in control today. And because we are His children, His sons and daughters, we can be sure that just as He was with Jesus, even though it looked like Christ was forsaken, He is with us. Worship team is going to come back and lead us in one final song about the crucifixion. Yes, it looks rather good. They want to go to the Jesus looked for Satan and by fall. Paul tells us that he truly is not. And I leave this to you for the benefit this morning. 2 Corinthians 5:18 and 19. Now all these things are from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, namely, that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. And he has committed to us the word of reconciliation. God was in Christ reconciling the world. God be with you.
Because the sin that Savior died, my sinful soul is captive free. For God was just satisfied to look on him and pardon me. To look on him and pardon me. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Praise the Lord, praise the Son of God. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Praise the Lord, praise the Son of God. Behold him there, the risen Lamb, my perfect, spotless righteousness, the great unchangeable I am, the King of glory and of praise. One in himself I cannot die. My soul is purchased by his blood. My hope is hid with Christ on high. With Christ my Savior and my God. With Christ my Savior and my God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.